Alrighty, I think we got that door closed back there, and we'll get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Holmes. I'm on the data team actually at DBT, so happy to be here this morning. We've got Patrick Miller here from Newfront with a good presentation for us today, so I'm not going to take any more of his time, and I'm going to let him take it away. Give it up for Patrick, everybody.
Thanks, Robert. All right, what's up, Coalesce? Here at Newfront, we didn't found our data team until close to the raise of our Series D round. We had BigQuery and Fivetran and Tableau, along with some basic analytics to help our leadership team make decisions. However, we merged with another company last year, and our leadership quickly realized that we needed data professionals to help support the 1,000-person company with centralizing, transforming, and actually using our data. So today I'm going to talk about how we went from 7 different Salesforce organizations, 5 agency management systems, and 800 Google Sheets into one with, well, fewer than each of those. But mostly I'm going to talk about how we established early credibility in our data team and how we went about building some business value for Newfront. So I'm Patrick Miller. I'm head of data here at Newfront. I've been here for about 11 months now, and before Newfront, I'd been really focused my entire career on machine learning and driving real-world value with machine learning. I like woodworking, chess, and machine learning, as you'll see very shortly. I was at Google running a machine learning team focused on business applications internally. And before that, I was at a publishing company where we used machine learning to get some value by identifying authors and genres that we should invest in for book deals. I've worked on machine learning applications for cancer genomics research. I've given several practical talks on how to use machine learning. Today, I'm not going to be talking about machine learning. This is not an ML talk. Sorry. This is actually a talk about going back to the basics and turning a business in a relationships and reputation industry into one that can actually get value out of its data and maybe even provide value to our clients through data products. Newfront is a tech-enabled commercial insurance brokerage. I like to think of us as a market maker. We sit in between our clients, who are businesses who have risks, and insurance carriers, who are big insurance companies who will underwrite those risks with insurance policies. Now, the commercial insurance brokerage industry is really built on reputation. If brokers use any technology, it's probably like email, or maybe some third-party SaaS applications that were probably built in the 80s. So one of Newfront's really core bets is that we can use data and technology to provide insights and a data-driven experience to our clients that they can't get anywhere else. Hold on, Patrick. You said you didn't found the data team until 4 years after Newfront started as a business. How is that the case if data is core to the vision of the company? Great question. And it's a really simple answer. Newfront's a tech-enabled business. We're not an internet company. We're not a SaaS company. We fundamentally believe that insurance professionals are critical to the future of the insurance business. And so our founders set out to build a company that was strong operationally before they invested heavily into data. That said, we didn't not use any data to start with. We had, like I mentioned, an incubating BizOps team who stood up some data infrastructure and got some analytics into our leadership's hands. However, after that big merger with this company called ABD, our source systems exploded, and we found ourselves not able to get access to reliable or timely data anymore. And so to dive a little bit more into the history at Newfront, there weren't really any data professionals. When I started, there was maybe one analyst who joined and then left, and then another analyst who joined and then left. It's pretty hard being a singleton in the data space sometimes. And then on the ABD side, there was, I think, a single data engineer, and they really focused on using the finance team to deliver any sort of analytics that they, any analytics that they actually leveraged. And so the two companies were merging just as I was beginning my conversations with Gordon, our CTO, and Aaron, our chief product officer. It was really clear to me from the way they talked about the company how data products were core to the vision that they wanted to accomplish. Aaron, Spike, and Gordon were very crystal clear, though, about where we were in our data journey, i.e. at the beginning. And the transparency and integrity that they had in those conversations was really refreshing, and the vision was clearly there, right? Data was a core to what we were trying to build. And so I joined in November of 2021. So how do you take a large legacy business company from basically the bottom of the data hierarchy of needs into one that can fundamentally deliver data products to its clients? There's several headwinds. You're going to have a lot of source systems. You're going to inherit a lot of analytics tech debt. And you're going to have some data culture problems. A lot of people aren't going to trust the data that you're delivering to them. Trying to fight all these headwinds at once is a bit foolish, and so I looked for ways to avoid the ones that I could and tackle the ones that I felt I had strengths in. There are 3 areas I came in wanting to focus on when I joined Newfront. I wanted to learn as quickly as possible, which should end in a basic strategy as well as an identification and fostering of data champions. I wanted to establish early credibility through a few key early wins. I wanted to tackle the source system proliferation problem head on because data was in a lot of different systems and our insurance professionals just weren't able to get at it. I wanted to avoid the analytics tech debt problem, but still wanted to build an analytics early win by tackling a problem that our leadership couldn't answer today. And then finally, I wanted to build a data product early win, which is kind of my bread and butter from my background, but I didn't want to tackle that first because of the data culture problems. And then finally, I wanted to focus on probably the most important thing, which is building a strong team. And that takes time, and so I wanted to also leverage certain different resources in order to get to those early wins without rushing who I was going to hire. But first is all about learning quickly. In your first 30 to 60 days, you shouldn't make any key decisions. You should just be learning as much as possible about the company, about the industry, about the key players in your business, about your local organization, about how the vision of the company gets reflected through the lens of different professionals at your company. And this requires meeting a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people. I talk to maybe 15 people or so in one-on-ones every single week for the first 4 weeks. What you should be looking for here, other than just learning, is identification of the key players in your business. You're going to find data skeptics, you're going to find people who are neutral about data, and you're going to find enthusiasts, people who really think data is important to the business. For those latter folks, you really want to start building a personal relationship with them so that when a crucial moment comes up, they can be champions for you. It's a lot easier to make a proposal that involves data when you have key leaders making it for you. Most of all this learning is just hard work, getting on people's calendars, actively listening to them, but some of it's luck as well. I remember my first week when I joined Newfront, I flew out to San Francisco to meet our tech leadership, basically my local organization. The last day I was heading out to the airport to fly back home, and I was chit-chatting with some folks in the office, and 2 women came to join the conversation. They noticed I had bags and offered me a ride to the airport. I, of course, said yes. Not because it's a lot easier to get to the airport at 6 p.m. on a Friday by car. In fact, it was a bumper-to-bumper slog in airport traffic. But it gave me the opportunity to meet more people, which was what I was trying to do. The luck paid off. Those 2 women ended up being the general manager of our property and casualty business and her right-hand lieutenant, Denise, so there's Colleen and Denise. And these are 2 people that I got a free full hour of personal relationship building ahead of maybe a month later when I was working very closely with them. So after my first month, I threw down my thoughts on what I learned into a few slides in the form of like a pretty rough sketch of a strategy, mostly around how we're going to build credibility for the data team and how we're going to achieve Newfront's vision that had a big data component at its core. These slides talked about how we could get to that vision, but mostly focused around those key wins and also who we needed to hire and how many, which I'll talk about at the later end of this talk. The strategy was relatively well received, but more importantly, it allowed me to start digging deeper into what people actually cared about in the business and whether or not the key wins that I thought were going to be important were important to people or not. So on to the meatiest part of the talk. How do you establish that early credibility through early wins? There are 3 wins that I ended up settling upon after that first learning period. One was a data engineering win through migrations and activations. The next was an analytics win through unified revenue reporting. And the final was delivering carrier appetite for our clients, basically a data products win. Sorry about that. In that order. In that order for a specific reason, right? Like you can't jump, even though data products is my core, you can't jump to delivering data products if people don't even trust their analytics. This isn't the right order for every company. It was the right order for us because of what I learned in my first few weeks. I learned, one, that insurance professionals couldn't get access to the data that they needed to do their job. And so we needed to get into the systems that they lived in. And 2, I sat in our tech organization with a very strong VP of engineering. And so I wanted to leverage that strength towards building credibility that, yes, we could move data from one place to another. This surprised me. You know, I didn't go into the company thinking I was going to focus on data engineering to start. Moving data from one place to another doesn't really provide value in and of itself, but it's kind of a prerequisite for a recently merged company. Speaking of which, I mentioned all the source systems that we had at the top of the talk. We had a lot, and as a merged company, you're going to have a lot too. We basically had 2 of each. We had Office 365 and G Suite. We had those 7 Salesforce organizations. We had this third-party agency management system, which is basically just an insurance system, and our own homegrown one. Very duplicative, but they all had data in them that were important. Part of our merger strategy was to not place a big burden on our servicing teams because we didn't want to have any client downstream impact. And so we weren't going to get our servicing team to just go into the new system of record and rekey all their data in. And so we needed to figure out a way to get data out of the old systems and into the new ones. When I joined, there were some software engineers who were thinking about this problem, and when I got introduced to it, I thought, this is a clear data engineering problem. So my team joined the conversation and jumped in. There are 2 particular migrations that were company-level initiatives at the time. One was for employee benefits business, getting out of one Salesforce system into another. And the other was getting our property and casualty business out of that third-party SaaS AMS system into our homegrown product. So by this point, I had 2 people on my team, and I was hiring a third. So how am I going to go about executing on this? These are 2 pretty big initiatives. I needed leverage, and I found that leverage in 2 different places. One was in aggressively leveraging a managed tool stack, and the other was borrowing aggressively from software engineers from my partner engineering teams to operate in that tool stack. We already had a basic data warehouse set up, and we had Fivetran piping data into it. So if we could just get the AMS systems data with Fivetran into our data warehouse, all we had to do was get it out of our data warehouse into the destination system. So enter high touch. We could have built a custom pipeline, and that's what the engineers were thinking, to get the data out of that AMS system into our own product, but that would have taken us more time and more effort and wouldn't have been great for building early credibility if it was going to take half a year. High touch allowed us to leverage a data warehouse-centric integration approach where we could just use dbt to transform all of the insurance industry's crazy data models into something that fit into our product, which also gave us additional leverage because there was a lot of duplicative work otherwise. This would also give us another paradigm, the paradigm that we would use for more bread and butter data activation use cases. With all those source systems, getting data in a relatively timely manner from one system to another, I predicted was going to be a problem we would face. Okay, so we had the tool stack, but who was going to execute on this? Enter the other piece of leverage. I report to the VP of engineering, and so all I had to do was convince Lynn that could I borrow a couple software engineers to execute on this top-level initiative? And it turns out software engineers can write SQL too. So at times I had 5 or so software engineers working in the DBT Centric stack of ours, and they're pretty good at it. I leaned particularly heavily on this one staff software engineer that we had just hired from Airbnb. I was pretty fortunate that he had also built a data activation platform internally there, and so he was pretty sold on the approach. And so with this support, I was able to turn my attention away from the execution and focus more on the landing of the data migration effort, which is a pretty big change management problem. So asking insurance professionals who have worked in the industry for 20 plus years to change their behavior is a pretty big ask. Before Google, I was at Macmillan, which is a 125-year-old publishing company. And so I had some experience with how do you get people to use data or technology to change the way that they do their work. And it's not something you can just ask them to do. You really have to lean in and bring them along for the ride. Remember that airport ride that I talked about? So Colleen manages the entire PNC servicing team, and so we talked about ways that we could effectively get this migration to land. A couple things that worked for us were sitting down with the PNC teams, whether at work or at happy hours, me personally fixing their IT issues if I had to, and hyping them up with a launch party. This is a photo of me at our launch for our first initial team. They thought of themselves as astronauts, so I went pretty all in. All right, so we had established credibility that we could get data from one place to another. The migrations went pretty successfully because we really leaned in and brought our servicing team along for the ride. They saw us as partners as opposed to a far-off tech team. So my attention was quickly turning towards how do we get a different win. We still worked on some data activation, bread and butter use cases, but my thought was how do we get that analytics win? Which is tricky because we had lots of Google Sheets and we had dozens of Tableau dashboards, barely any of which actually got into use, and a few of the key ones seemed to break all the time. My team would help out and try to fix them occasionally, and we lean pretty heavily on our BizOps team to support as well. I wanted to take a step back and talk about our Tech Week onsite that we had in August. This is a photo from an icebreaker competition that my team ended up winning. It's building the largest, tallest paper straw tower. And much like our analytics tech stack, it was held together by tape, a marshmallow, and a piece of string anchored to the table that we dubbed Ryan Lau, or the director of BizOps at the time, who knew the best about Newfront's data. Our approach to our analytics tech debt was a very best effort one. We wanted to avoid fighting fires early on as much as we could. And so we established a weekly on-call and did our best to fix issues as they came up. But for the first 8 months, we avoided this tech debt aggressively and focused instead on quarterly initiatives and OKRs. Maintenance work was not going to present a clear win to build credibility off of. So instead, we went looking for areas where leadership was not able to make data-informed decisions with reliable data. We turned to revenue reporting. Newfront had been able to have pretty decent revenue reporting before the merger, but after the merger, it was a big problem. Our finance team could pull together at the end of the month, sometimes a few days after the end of the month, but we wanted to make decisions that weren't on a monthly cadence. And so this is where my team and I started turning our attention. How do we get our leadership team making timely decisions with reliable, single source of truth revenue reporting? There have been some false starts in this area already. Our sales operation team was very focused on booked revenue or one business, whereas our executives really wanted to build revenue because that's how we did our forecasts and our budgeting. And so there are some other headwinds as well, right? Your disparate data sources, like this disagreement on key metrics, as well as a boatload of data quality issues, obviously. The key to success for us here was constant communication with our stakeholders. And so we worked in weekly meetings with our CFO and finance team, our COO and RevOps team, and we got the single source of truth revenue dashboard into the hands of our executives so we could get feedback as quickly as possible. There were two key questions that we were anchoring on to help us distill needs from wants. how are we doing as a business, and where are we underperforming or outperforming, and why. Executives wanted a lot of different things, but being able to distill to those two key questions allowed us to really focus on the highest leverage work. So as part of the revenue reporting initiative, I made my first big ask. We had a lot of data quality issues, and in my mind, this was mostly stemming from some data entry hygiene, which was a people and culture problem at its core. And so I drafted this document called Data Ownership at Newfront. One of Newfront's core values is act like owners, which I molded into a call for better ownership over our data as a strategic asset. And this was both from like a semantics perspective as well as a systems perspective. We needed our tech team both capturing data much more intentionally for clear purposes, and then we also needed our business owners to treat data as a strategic asset and make sure it was of high quality. The jury's still out on how this is going to actually end up going. It's a pretty long-range effort, but the buy-in is there. So revenue reporting launched its first version with pretty good feedback. Obviously, still some issues, still iterating, but it's really easy to land this when you've built up some credibility already and you have key data champions behind you in the CFO and COO. And it also helps if you really pay attention closely to the needs of your key stakeholders, which in this case were sales leadership. So I turned my attention away from analytics and towards the last win, building a data product. Now, this is, like I said, my bread and butter, but I avoided it because of the data culture issues that we had. It's really hard to sell a human-in-the-loop data product when the humans don't even trust their basic analytics. And so we needed to build up credibility elsewhere first. And with revenue reporting in a good state, most of my team, which had grown to 8 by this time, turned its attention towards how do we deliver a data product. In this case, how do we surface appetite that carriers have to our servicing teams so that they can understand what markets they should be going to for a particular industry and policy type. This is how I think about building a data product. It's very iterative in nature, and it requires a get to failure quickly mentality as well as a keen eye for business impact. It starts with the product manager routine of identifying user problems and prioritizing on the top impact ones. Once you settle on a problem, you then go figure out what data you need if you don't already have it. And then you spend some cycles on data exploration so you can understand your data domain more deeply and understand if there's data quality issues. After that, you turn into multiple cycles of iterating on prototypes. You want to get quickly to something that works, and when you get to something that works, or if you get to something that works, then you put it into production with automated data pipelines and monitoring. The key here is to get to failure quickly at each stage and pivot when things aren't going the way that you would expect. One of the crucial parts of the data product lifecycle is what I like to call getting to minimum viable business impact. It's really, really easy to get caught up in sophisticated techniques like machine learning. But I've delivered dozens of data products in my career, and that rarely actually works out in driving business value. What does is very quickly getting to a simple solution that actually works. It could be simple heuristics, or it could be basic analytics that you deliver to a human in the loop. What matters is that it improves upon the existing processes or product that's already out there. This is also another great opportunity to leverage a managed tool or service to get to value as quickly as possible. In our case, we use Hex, which is a managed notebook service. We use it because it gives us two things. It allows us to collaborate internally very effectively and iterate over ideas more quickly than we could without it. And then it also gives us a clean interface for presenting early prototypes to our users or our user proxies in order to get feedback on, does this actually help me with my job? In our case, with carrier recommendations, this is the Hex notebook that we use for prototyping. It's really basic. It's basically you take in industry and policy type, and you output a rank-ordered list of carriers that you should go to market with, along with some basic analytics that tell you why. Simple, straightforward, pretty effective. Before this, our insurance professionals were just using tribal knowledge, so anything was seen as a blessing for them. We iterated on this with them for quite a bit, and we ended up with this beautiful, beautiful machine learning recommendation engine. Just kidding. I told you this was not about machine learning, and I'm not going to talk about ML anymore. If you want to hear more about ML or how we build data products at Newfront, convince Coalesce to bring me back next year. So I've talked about learning quickly and identifying champions, building credibility through 3 types of early wins. The last part is building a strong team. I inherited only one data professional, which is a luxury. Building a team from scratch in light of the other headwinds is a big opportunity. And so there are 3 key things that I kept in mind for building the team: culture and values fit, transparency of the situation, and senior data generalists first. Newfront has 4 core values: focus on people, blaze the trail, act like owners, and deliver results. I want to focus on the ownership piece. Act like owners means that you take accountability for what you deliver to your client. It means that when you see a problem, you solve the problem. And it also means, for a data professional, that you sometimes get uncomfortable and go outside of your domain and you wear different hats if it means delivering value to the business through data. One other key value that I look out for data professionals is the ability to get to failure quickly. This is the most critical characteristic of a data professional, in my opinion. Without it, you don't get to business value as quickly as you could. Unlike normal software engineering, data can take you in many different directions, and the best data professionals I know are ones who don't fight the data. They're ones that pivot and get to that failure point quickly so that they can iterate and find the right direction that we should go in. If you ask anyone on my team, they'll probably admit that I'm bluntly transparent about where we are in our data journey and where we are as a company. We're not a tech startup. We're tech-enabled. Our data culture still needs some work. Our data's small. You're not going to be using any big data technologies or streaming technologies. But data is a core moat that we're trying to use at Newfront to build a competitive advantage, so it actually matters to our company. We have really strong leadership at the top and a great company culture, and you're going to have a ton of ownership opportunities here because there's so much impact to be had. You know, this might not be the best approach for recruiting for any company, but for us, it really helped me focus on people who shared these same values and were really going to be in it for the long run. We turned away a lot of great otherwise good candidates. Which brings me to the last point. When you're building a team from the ground up, you can't hire junior, and you can't hire specialists. The reason is, if you're trying to establish that credibility with early wins, you really need people who can take a business problem all the way from collection to business impact. And that's a culture thing, but it's also a skills thing as well. And so analytics engineers, I found, are pretty well suited to be this data generalist, especially in a small data environment with managed tools. They can operate up and down the stack, and a lot of them are ex-analysts, so they can work with stakeholders okay. This might take longer to find people for your team, but it's important to get the right early hires correct, because a bad early hire is really detrimental, especially for the morale of the team, especially for folks who are pulling a lot of weight. Getting the right people in place is the most important part of building a business, something that I also share pretty deeply with Newfront's leadership. Well, that's all I have for you today, so I hope you've taken away something from this presentation. Learn quickly and identify champions, build credibility through multiple early wins, and build a strong team and leverage existing tooling, managed tooling, and non-data professionals in the interim. So zip, zap, zoop. Here at Newfront, we are just getting started. Data is the future of insurance, and Newfront is poised to be the commercial insurance brokerage who turns that into a reality. data is core to what we're doing here. And so if you want to learn more or you just want to chat about data with me, I'm always happy to, either here on Slack or on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Patrick. That was good. I don't know about anybody else, but the fail quickly and learn and pivot is a key point. Definitely will take that. So thanks again, Patrick, for being here. Great talk. And thank everybody else for being here as well. I know we've got a lot more sessions. We've got lunch coming up. And also, don't forget, we've got the expert lounge out in the Storyville Hall as well. So if you have questions about DBT, things that have been, in your mind, definitely go talk to some of our experts to get that help. All right? So we'll see you on the next session. Thanks, y'all.